Hello, Prime Media audiences. This is your host, Ladette Muleta. I'm here with a special guest today. He is joining me from all the way from New Zealand. His name is Alistair Thompson. Alistair, thank you so much for joining me here at Prime Media. I'm so glad that you took the time to come here. I know it's been a busy time for you while you've been in Ethiopia. Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Please let me start off by asking you to give a description to our audiences, who you are, what you do, what's your background, what brings you to Ethiopia, and what you're currently doing.
Okay, so I'm a independent journalist from New Zealand, publisher and editor of a publication called scoop.co.nz that was founded in the 1990s. And I have a background in politics, investigative and business journalism and international relations as well. And I've been here for the last 6 weeks doing field research and basically supplementing about 12, 13 months of work where I've been following closely the story of Ethiopia since around April last year.
Well, great. It sounds like you're taking keen interest in what's happening in Ethiopia. What areas of Ethiopia did you travel, and what did you observe? What has been your trip? I think overall, how long have you been here, and what have you been doing?
So I arrived on the 21st of April, and my first field trip was to Gondar. The timing of the trip was largely related to the release or the announcement of the Gondar University study, which was it's now nearing completion. And this is a study into essentially crimes committed in Welkite and the annexed territories in Welkite, Tegede, which were annexed in 1995, but which were invaded earlier by the TPLF towards the end of the Derg War. And this area is now called Western Tigray in Western media, and there have been continuous calls for its return to Tigray. And as part of peace negotiations, for quite a long time there were discussions that return of Western Tigray ought to be some kind of precondition to peace negotiations. I think, in fact, this TPLF sort of demanded that should be the case when the government sort of had its unilateral humanitarian ceasefire in June. And it's a crime scene. Welkite is a crime scene. There has been terrible things that have been done there over a very lengthy period of time. And a lot of victimization, and this is all detailed in the report. So, I went there and I spoke to the researchers. I went up to a place called Adi Salam, which is quite close to the Tekezi River. On the border of Weldabar, and in Nadi Remits I interviewed some monks who came from the Weldabar monastery, which is a 1600-year-old monastery that was founded in legend by Jesus himself, and which had around 1,200 monks in it at the time that the TPLF invaded it about 9 months ago. Mm-hmm. And monks have been tortured and mutilated and killed. And I also travelled up to a place called Adi Salam, which is a village which appears to be built on top of mass graves of people who were tortured and murdered in the early stages of the TPLF's advances across the Tekezi River into Welkite, which is a territory of Gondar in Amhara region, but which the TPLF basically stole and had their eyes on for quite a long time. the TPLF manifesto talks about Amhara being the eternal enemy of the Tigrayans, which is sort of, I don't know, kind of weird,
Yeah.
but sick. So that was the first trip. After that, I came back to Addis for a few days, and then I went to Afar. And in Afar, I was interested to try to look at what was happening with the convoys, and also what had happened since December. And I interviewed a lot of, well, no, not a lot, but I interviewed quite a few IDPs and visited IDP camps about their experiences. And there was, I mean, what happened there essentially is that at the point when the world was told that the war had ended, in the end of December, when the TPLF had withdrawn back to Mekelle, they didn't actually withdraw back to Mekelle. And on the 17th of December, or thereabouts, they attacked Afar, and they attacked pastoralists on the tops of the mountains above the main pastoral areas where the Afar pastoralists live in the sort of, they're not quite highlands, but they're near the highlands of Afar. And they after fighting with the Afar, they then realised that they needed more firepower, and they came in with tanks and artillery, and they shelled the city of Abala. And the city of Abala then, the people of Abala, all of the people of Abala, then fled. And there's been a lot of misinformation about what happened in Abala, because at the time there were these reports that there had been some form of treachery by Tigrayan Afari who were in the town. And what I was told in Afar was that there was no such thing happened. The Tigrayans identify as Afar, and they fled with all the other people from Zone 2. And TPLF didn't content themselves just with attacking Abala and looting it and stealing everything from the hospital and smashing the town up, burning the hospital, not burning the hospital, burning the school, trying to set fire to the mosque. They shelled St. Michael's Church. So I mean, I visited Abala about 3 weeks after TPLF had finally left, towards the end, I think, of April, or maybe even in May. Maybe early May, I'm not sure exactly when they left. But, I mean, during this period of time when they were occupying this area, many of the pastoralists were still in the area, and they were starving, and they couldn't get aid. And so the Afar, while I was there, I spent quite a bit of time talking to Malika, who is called the Flower of the Desert by the Afari people. She's sort of she's an Australian, so another Antipodean like me, and she told us quite a few stories about what had happened. I mean, it's in this area. This is the area where the trucks are being used. There's these gigantic convoys, and when I was there, I was watching these convoys going up. So the convoys have just resumed, and the reason they've just resumed is because the TPLF have only just left. And they left because they were defeated by the Afar. And the Afar militias suffered very significant casualties. In Samara, a lot of the IDPs were in terrible conditions. I was told by a bunch of doctors that there was going to be a measles outbreak. And I raised this with International Red Cross and UNICEF. And it appears that after I left, there was in fact an effort by MSF Belgium to vaccinate many of the children. The test results eventually came back, and there's not measles, thank heavens. But the state of the malnutrition levels in Afar are much higher than they are in Amhara. Well, they're not that much higher than Amhara, but if the official statistics from the UN's own monitoring show that Afari children malnutrition is the highest, followed by Amhara and followed by Tigray. And yet again, the main dominant media narrative that we constantly hear is simply about Tigray itself, and there's this endless refrain of siege and and yeah, and I mean, it's not in accord with reality. What we're being told about this war.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight the suffering of all people, not picking and choosing. I think is the point. And what are you going to do with all these things that you have grasped? The information, the research you've done, you've collected information, interviews, and so forth. What are you planning on doing with that information?
So when I get back, I'm probably going to write a bunch of stories about these issues. But I think it's important to try to frame them. So I mean, we have a conflict here, which is, I think, possibly unique in human history. I mean, there have been wars of lies before, but this is a war of lies in which the lies are the dominant part of the war. Even though there is horrific military action, tens of thousands of people have died in the military action, tens of thousands of people have died, civilians have been killed in this war. But the dominant aspect to this war is United States aggression towards Ethiopia, which is being facilitated and enabled by the European Union and the United Nations. There is abundant evidence that United Nations aid supplies and trucks and medical supplies have been used for military purposes in the invasion of Amhara and of Afar. And fuel as well, and none of that is even being discussed in Western media. I mean, there is not even. Yeah, I don't think I could point to any stories that have been written which have even raised the possibility of that, and yet the evidence is clear. The US aid themselves held a press conference where they announced that the TPLF were looting their warehouses and UNICEF warehouses of supplies and taking them back to Tigray. And that was during the invasion of Amhara in the period between July and December. And I mean, in Afar, I was told that they were still doing that. They were still stealing the food that was being delivered to IDP camps and to IDPs, stealing it and then selling it back to them. And also, I mean, in Afar, I mean, the World Food Programme was delivering whole grain wheat to people who had no milling equipment. I mean, you can't eat whole grain wheat.
Yep. Yes, it's. I mean, talking about in the context that you have just put it, it's going to be plenty of books about this past few year and a half or 2 years. Where it's going to have the suffering of people, like you say, suffering of civilians, the lies, the proxy war, the involvement of other organizations, and so forth. It's going to make a lot of history books, I believe. So where do you see Ethiopia in the next few years? With all this negative things that that has transpired. There's also a lot of positive things in Ethiopia. It's undeniable. And with the combination of those two things, where do you see Ethiopia in the next few years? Like, what do you imagine?
Well, I see. I've been here 6 weeks, as you say, and I mean, I've met a lot of people and talked to a lot of people. I see a country which is desirous of peace, that's united in its desire for peace, that shares common faith. It has remarkable religious tolerance and religious harmony, that has this overbearing history of 50 years of proxy warfare, and in that, embedded in the last 30 years, the period of TPLF of rule, which TPLF proxy rule, and let's say call it TPLF US proxy rule, because that's what this is. They have had this strange ethnic federalism system imposed upon them, which everybody wants, well, nearly everybody that I can see, everyone that I've met basically wants to see dismantled. And the challenge of dismantling that is considerable because it's written into the law. It's much easier to create political parties which are ethnic based than any other kind of political party. You can also create regional parties, but regional parties are also effectively ethnic within the context. And there is this, I don't know, there's this unfortunate dialogue, and then there is also violence. And I think a lot of the violence that we are seeing, for example, between OLA and, which is the OLA in the Ma'ara region, which is I think one of the most tragic and difficult things for anyone to deal with at the moment in the country, is actually also TPLF. OLA announced an alliance with the TPLF, and their continued attacks, I think, are part of intimidation, part of an effort to try and destabilise the nation and to continue to drive hatred between different ethnic groups. When the idea of ethnicity in this country is nonsense. I mean, everybody that I meet has got, I don't know, parents from different ethnicities, and then you ask them about their grandparents, and you quite often end up with 4 or 5 ethnicities. Yes, I mean that's the challenge. I think I can see Ethiopia getting through this. The national dialogue is the sort of the formal process which is going to proceed to seek to address this. When I was in Bahidar, I went to a conference, a political science conference, which was addressing a lot of these issues. And one of the speakers there was a chap called Degafi. I can't remember his second name. He's a peace
Conflict, yeah. He's actually been a guest here.
Oh, great, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he's in a very lovely man.
Yes.
Yeah, and he delivered a beautiful speech where he was talking about how this is a psychological issue, and that the trauma that Ethiopia has experienced and needs to address within the context of the national dialogue is not the question of what the structure and what the new laws should be and what the constitution should say. It's actually trying to address the psychological trauma that everybody in this country feels. And it won't work unless that is where the heart of this comes. And I asked him about faith, so I said, well, okay, so what role will faith play in this? And because one thing I've noticed is that, I mean, this city, Addis, I call it the singing city, because I wake up every morning and there's always singing. And there's both Muslim and Christian singing, which is sometimes extraordinarily loud, and it's I think there's this beautiful religious harmony in this country, and there is such a lot of faith. I mean, it's 90+%. I mean, and Degafi was talking about that as well. And I think that building the new Ethiopia based on that solid ground of a common sense of understanding of God and of ethics and of the teachings of Islam and of Christianity.
Great. Yeah. Oh, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I think one point that you brought up is about the federalism, and I think you said most people that you've seen or you've talked to have do not want ethnic federalism, or it doesn't even actually have to be ethnic federalism. Just like, for instance, in the U.S., when you go to like the East Coast, certain type of policies are automatically, what's favored. I mean, a great example would be you go to, Texas, and they're very much into their the amendment of gun ownership. They protect it, it's something, or it's in the South where people are very keen, or they want to protect that right. And then you go to the East Coast in New York and Washington, D.C. area, and that is very frowned upon, and so is in California and so forth. So I think Ethiopia has those issues in regards to federalism. There are areas in Ethiopia where the whole federalism is completely frowned upon because it's automatically associated with ethnic identity. And then in other areas of Ethiopia, I know you haven't traveled yet, but when you get a chance in the future, when you travel in other parts of the area, federalism is almost like a protection of their rights. This goes back to psychology, I guess, because there's a lot of background history, and depending on the background and how the country has evolved. Usually, things have been on the center, and outer areas have not had control or much ability to grow and so forth. So the federalism protects and allows and gives them the ability to have a say-so. So one of the challenging things that Ethiopia needs to strike is a balance of making sure that these rights of these individuals are protected, while also making sure that that everyone else's right is protected and not divisive. So this was one of those challenges. Yeah. But I just wanted to let you know, if you did cover a certain area, you might feel like everybody doesn't want federalism. But
no, it's not. Yeah. It's not. I mean, it's not federalism, and I wasn't criticizing federalism.
Yeah.
Federalism itself, I think, is fine. I think it's necessary in this country because you have these extremely varied and large numbers of different cultural groups and cultural practices and ways of living and so forth. I mean, it's an enormously varied place. This is where humanity evolved. Yeah. But I mean, federalism is not a bad system. Germany's a federal state. I mean, I don't think France is, but I mean, it's got a lot of devolved administrative responsibility and power, and I mean, so does most of the world these days. The issue is the emphasis on ethnicity and making people choose which ethnicity they have. And I think, I mean, I was visiting the Government Communications Ministry office yesterday, and there seems to be a project under the way there, a new national ID thing. I mean, hopefully they're just going to discard the whole notion of ethnicity because it's meaningless. Yeah. And it's an unnecessary part of this. I mean, the Ethiopian ID used to have ethnicity on it, and it's now removed. Right. The new IDs that are coming out, there's no ethnicity, which is definitely too unnecessary. But I'm glad you explained it. I was trying to kind of give you how the other side of the country also thinks. So I think we kind of covered what some of the challenges are. You already mentioned the laws, the federalism, the ethnic federalism, and the national dialogue process. What is the role of the international community currently? Is the international community helpful in stabilizing Ethiopia? We do see some signs that the international community seems to be looking to work with the Ethiopian government, with the Ethiopian people, to respect the desires of the majority of the Ethiopian people. What can the international community do more of, and what do you think Ethiopians should do as well? So I mean, this is the core reason that I'm here. I'm from the West. I'm from New Zealand, which is part of Five Eyes. So Five Eyes is this shadowy security alliance between the Anglo countries, so Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the UK and the US. And in this particular conflict, the most important and worst role is being played by the United States of America, unquestionably. This war appears to have been sanctioned by the Democratic Party of the United States. And it's shocking to realise this. And the reasons for that are, I don't know, impossible to understand. And I think a lot of people here would point towards the relationship between Mela Zenawi and Susan Rice, and also Gail Smith, that there was a sort of like some kind of warm, cozy relationship between people in the foreign policy team in the Obama administration, but also prior to that, I think. I mean, but importantly in the Obama administration and the TPLF, and when Haile Mariam Desalegn resigned and Abiy came to power, I mean, what we know from abundant evidence is that the TPLF immediately sought to attack him and to remove him, and they killed people, and they probably killed Hachulu Kondesa, and they attempted to try and kill Abiy at least twice, and they killed one of the most senior generals, and I mean the TPLF, their structure, their military structure is one of a Maoist sort of cell-like intelligence structure, which had people who were working, who had privileged power within the Ethiopian community, and they had secret police, and they arrested people, and people weren't allowed to necessarily speak about politics or not criticise. And I mean, my driver here in Addis said to me, well, I mean, he's not happy about everything, but he said to me that at least now everybody can talk about politics. I mean, everybody can freely talk about politics here. They can criticise Abiy, and they do. Everybody does. I mean, a lot of people are pretty unhappy with some of the decisions that are being made. But that's normal. That's the way a normal society would work. But the international community then proceeded to and I mean, the United States proceeded to essentially whitewash. I mean, the war took place, the war started on November the 3rd and the 4th, and it started with a horrendous attack on military bases inside Tigray, and also Western Tigray. So one of those military bases is in Welkite, Dansha. I mean, I think there might be other military outposts there as well, maybe in Humera. And they killed, it's estimated, around 6,000 troops, many of whom were officers, and remarkably, they failed. They were planning on attacking. So one of the things when I was in Gonda is there's this place called Karaka on top of a mountain where there's the border between Welkite and Gonda, I mean, it's all Gonda, but the border between what was Western Tigray and is now back in Gonda, and Gonda, and at that border, the Amhara Special Forces stopped. They held back a TPLF advance down a road which would have taken them directly to Gonda, and they held them off for not long enough to allow Bahir ENDF forces, and I think Gonda ENDF forces and various other forces to join them. And enable, I think, presumably air power. I think there was airstrikes. But the TPLF basically fled immediately, and they fled back into Tigray. And at the same time, a lot of the Tigrayans in that region also left of their own accord. But the international community immediately started embracing a whole narrative that was based on lies, and Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, I think, were a core part of this, and the University of Ghent, which is an institution whose the geography department in the University of Ghent has close associations with the TPLF. It's another part of the international community, if you like, which is affectionate towards the TPLF, and the United Nations relies on relied, and I don't know if it still does, but it has relied very extensively on data provided by the University of Ghent, which is effectively provided by a network of people inside of Tigray who are in the TPLF. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty also produced reports based mainly on phone calls to people inside Tigray. And I mean, these people talked about crimes being committed against them. I mean, and I'm sure that there were horrible crimes that were committed, perhaps by soldiers, some soldiers. And the Ethiopian government has in fact prosecuted some of its soldiers. I think at least 60 of them have been prosecuted because they investigated and evidence was found against them, and they were prosecuted, and I think some of them are in jail. But I mean, TPLF has never even admitted any of its crimes. And Dr. Tedros Adhanom, who is a member of the TPLF, he's a member of the Central Committee of the TPLF. I mean, this is the sort of the great, another one of these, I mean, fascism is always built on big lies. And the sanctity of Tedros is another one of these enormous big lies. I mean, he before he was appointed, he presided over covering up cholera outbreaks because he didn't want to be embarrassed by there being cholera outbreaks, and he said that they were diarrhea. And then, I mean, there's evidence, certainly accusations, that in the Amhara region there was forms of sort of forced sterilisation of Amhara women took place, and probably particularly in Welkite. And hopefully the University of Gonda study and the investigations which are taking place will get to the bottom of that. And then now he's in the WHO, and he has consistently used his platform for ever since the war began. I mean, he was quite quiet at the beginning, but I mean, I think by the time we got to sort of early 2021, he's just been constantly using the platform to claim victimhood. And inside the UN, because of his relationships with the other very senior leaders, most importantly Sir Mark Lovecock, who was the UN humanitarian coordinator in the first place, he's been in a position to help facilitate and enable a humanitarian operation which could support the TPLF. And there's a history of this back in the days of Live Aid, which is the main reason that Westerners will understand, or like most people in the West, if you say, well, what do you know about Ethiopia? And they're starving babies, Live Aid. That's it. That's the only thing that they know.
Yep.
and what they don't know about Live Aid is that Live Aid was an aid laundering operation which was used to arm the TPLF and the EPLF. So there was a communist regime in Ethiopia, and aid shipments were sold and then resold and resold and resold. Now, that was a money laundering operation. You can only do that sort of thing if somebody's providing the money. And the money must have been coming from the United States. And that's partly why they have this relationship with them. But then they had the deniability. The deniability of the fact that they were funding this essentially Cold War struggle against the Derg, which was supported by the Russians. And then eventually they won. And then after they won, there was a whole series of conferences, and Ethiopia wanted. There was London agreements, and there was various other national dialogues, and one of these was discussed when I was in Bahida, and it failed. And the reason it failed was because the United States imposed a different settlement. They imposed TPLF as the government. They granted EPLF was granted a referendum and allowed to secede, and the TPLF was given full control over the government, and the rest is history. And yeah, I don't know. It makes
a lot to digest.
Makes me sick. Frankly, it makes me sick.
Yeah, it's a lot to digest, and I think, fortunately, the world continues and it has to evolve, and there has been serious attacks on Ethiopia. It's undeniable. Serious attack against its people, against its government, inflaming further conflict within within its people that has been done from the outside. And but I think, Ethiopia wants peace, like you said. I think everyone in the country wants peace, and they want to move forward, and they want to prosper. They want to grow their country. They want to have a peaceful life, just like anyone. And I, as hard as it is, want to forgive and gain respect. At the end of the day, is to forgive the wrongs that was done by others, and forgive the wrongs that they have done themselves as well, and to move as partners, as an equal contributor to this world that we live in. So I know that you're doing an excellent job. Thank you for being here and witnessing for yourself about this, significant tragedy or history, part of Ethiopia's history, and being a witness and sharing your knowledge with the rest of the world. I think we hope the best, and I hope that Ethiopia will continue to have great relationship with New Zealand, and I hope your writings and your advocacy for Ethiopia would further increase better relations with Ethiopia. Unfortunately, I feel like we can talk forever, but we're gonna have to end this. Alistair, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming here. This has been a wonderful interview. I hope you're gonna be back, or if I ever come to New Zealand, I'll definitely be visiting. It's been a pleasure having you, and thank you on behalf of my audiences for all the things that you're doing for Ethiopia.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Prime Media audiences, this is my time with Alistair. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll be back with another guest.